my name again. I think that got missed out in the noise there. My name is Ritika Jhanji. And on behalf of Institute of Directors India, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome all of you to this very, very special IOD India Global webinar. All of you are very esteemed, are very distinguished members, our associates, our IOD family that's joining us from across geographies, I'm told. I just saw somebody joining us from London talking about the weather from there. It's really great to have you all here for this special webinar. And let me tell you that this webinar today is being supported by NASDAQ Board Advantage, and the associate partner is Steel Authority of India Limited. And in today's webinar, we will be focusing on maximizing board's effectiveness and engagement amid pandemic. Now that all of us are talking about this pandemic, this COVID-19 has really thrown open profound challenges in front of board of directors. There is a dramatic increase in the amount of uncertainty organizations are facing. And as we talk about it, now the board of directors that are kept it in charge of looking at the short-term and the long-term health of companies and their overall growth prospects now have to also give a very, very careful consideration to a lot of unprecedented issues and a plethora of them that have come up because of COVID-19. Looking at corporate governance, it has become even more central, and talking of sustainability, it has manifested itself in a completely new avatar and the ways to handle it now during this pandemic. So today's webinar is going to have us debate how the lessons the board of directors can actually take from this uncertainty and help steer clear of this and navigate this crisis to actually guide and take forward their organizations better. And we are extremely delighted to have amongst us some very noted speakers today, leaders with vast experience, very distinguished names will be sharing their insights, their words of wisdom, and will all be helping us in planning that how do we have a better, more sustainable future. But before we actually settle down and begin the session, we would like to play out a very special short video by our main partner, NASDAQ Board Advantage. Since we are all connected virtually today, we all know that our work meetings have become so virtual that this reality has come to an extent that we had never even imagined. Talking of that, NASDAQ Governance Solutions Technology, it actually offers digital board solutions, compliance questionnaires, surveys, everything is done digitally as a great alternative to a lot of paper-based processes and a lot more. So before we begin the session, let's quickly take a look at this very special video.
At NASDAQ, we're committed to helping organizations achieve corporate governance excellence and to developing unique products that empower business leaders to innovate, grow, and stay ahead of changing markets. It's why we offer solutions that reimagine governance for boards, committees, and leadership groups. NASDAQ Boardvantage, our next-generation governance board portal, makes every aspect of board meetings and board interactions simpler and easier to manage. Powered by NASDAQ's technology and protected by world-class security, our governance platform is always ready with what you need, anytime, anywhere. For board directors and senior executives, you'll never be far from the work that needs to get done. Log in with one touch and find everything you need for your next board or management meeting, right there, ready whenever and wherever you are. Meeting agendas and reading materials are laid out clearly and are easily accessible. And when new information has been posted, you'll receive a secure notification. AutoSync will ensure documents are updated automatically and accessible online or offline, so you'll never be out of the loop. Votes, approvals, and signing important documents via e-signature are managed with a simple click, adding a level of reliability and efficiency to every step of your board's communication process. And with custom markup tools, markers and highlighters will help you annotate like a pro. Create private or shared notes and send notifications via email or text message. With NASDAQ Boardvantage, you'll have everything and everyone all in one app, protected by multiple layers of security. Operating at an expert level of efficiency and always prepared for whatever's next. Visit business.nasdaq.com/boardvantage to request your demo today.
So that was a very special video by our main partner, NASDAQ, and I hope you got a gist of the NASDAQ Governance Solutions Technology. And I'm sure you can inquire more about that. Moving forward, before I get on to the very special keynote address, I would like to invite the President of Institute of Directors India, Lieutenant General J.S. Palualia, to please come forward and deliver the welcome address.
Thank you. Can you hear me? It's a pleasure to welcome you all, our valued IOD members, honored speakers, and guests. This important webinar on effectiveness and engagement among current pandemic, organized by the IOD, supported by our valued partners, Nasdaq, Board Advantage, and Steel Authority of India Limited. As you know, IOD is a membership-based, not-for-profit, sole professional association of corporate directors in India. Its major roles include training and updating of directors through a variety of open house, in-house, and online training programs. It has a large number of condensed professional reference handbooks and journals for the directors. Second is networking through professional workshops, annual international conventions in India and abroad, in London, Dubai, Singapore, and Board Research and Advisory Division, which deals with research and surveys covering compliance and evaluation of board and director performance. The basic role of IOD are small, that is, preparing board-ready directors, including their proficiency test for certification of independent directors, getting into the data bank, and preparing future-ready boards for the changing business models and meeting the crisis management. This webinar is timely and apt for that. Informative and inspiring for corporate directors, focusing on required new role of boards socially for matching the needs of the current COVID-19 pandemic and new emerging business norms. It will be thought-provoking, interactive, and directors have to be part of the solution rather than the problem. In the last 3 decades, the corporate landscape has changed vastly. Even pre-COVID era had a non-linear, volatile, and turbulent economy where success was based on diversity and inclusiveness, innovation, not optimization, and not by profit, but by public perception of the difference that the company made in the society. Of the top 100 economic entities in the world today, only 30 are countries. The balance 70 are corporates or what we call MNCs. Of course, the family businesses continue. 1/3 of the large business houses in India are still family businesses. Major decisions are there to suit the family, not the firm. There is need to discern the dichotomy between business and personal affairs. The corporate disruptions through globalization and emerging technologies have been a common phenomenon. We've all been going through it. But the geopolitical and economic disruptions or a tsunami-like COVID-19 disaster, they have really disrupted the global markets and strategic supply chains, a devastating catastrophe. The volatility has been a state of dynamic instability that creates risks in a state of rapid changes in opportunities for value creation. While ambiguity is navigating through fog, any lack of compelling vision, absence of a structured approach and roadmap, and failure to address the unthinkable is nothing but willful blindness. We can't fail to adapt and cope with unprecedented social, political, and economic upheavals. Major disruptions create new normals. Organizations need to see disruptions as opportunities and setbacks as mere temporary. We need an agile and resilient leadership with a multiple stakeholder and customer-centric, dynamic strategy. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, has been an unprecedented human tragedy, one of the worst health and financial emergency with a few far-reaching repercussions. It has put brakes on the economic growth, pushing the world into largest recession since 1933. The Reserve Bank study on Monday, this just 2 days, 3 days back, predicted that India's growth this financial year is likely to be around minus 4.5% of the GDP. It certainly puts India's dream of US 5 trillion economy by 2024 forward by a few years. The pandemic has been unrelenting. The threat to our health and economy is real. COVID-19 has become the known unknown. It is not going away anytime soon. We need a digital recovery through upskilling with safe contactless engagements to strike an emotional connect with our team, with our circumstances, with the technology, and an ongoing basis to build social capital and a culture of excellence. While agility, innovation, and collaboration point the way forward, the data-rich cloud technology platforms provide an extra edge. There is no window dressing which will help us. Working remotely, of course, has become a new normal, though remote work has not been a panacea, but old days are not likely to come back again. We will need to retain some positives of the remote working and video conferencing and speedily focus on recovering our. We need to convert the crisis into an opportunity. The boards, of course, with the Companies Act 2013, it raised the bar for the boards in India with new rules, responsibilities, with independent and women directors being brought in, and number of such other measures. It made the board as watchdog and trustee of the owners and shareholders with multiple stakeholders, regular dialogue, cultural, ethical, to identify the concerns, the priorities, and trends became necessary. The risk oversight, vision, mission, objectives, managing risks, policies, risk appetite, culture, ERM, CBR security, cyber security, all these became important in their own way, and board had to really manage it for the organization. The strategy, which is dynamic, digitally value-driven, with long-term view, life cycle planning, and sustainability. It is to keep pace with technology, which is creative, innovative, and compliance-oriented. The annual performance review of the board, of the chair, as well as all the directors has been made mandatory now, but still it is not a third party. In UK, every 3 years, a third party has to be conducted. This probably will have to be considered in India also. A good chemistry for the team dynamics. We need to align strategy, policy, business processes, and people. We have to structure the approach to risk. We have to create a culture of trust and respect, and we need to be business savvy board dynamics. The business really failed the test of 2008 financial crisis. Number of firms in USA and Europe had to close down, highlighting greed and group thinking. The recent own examples have been also the problems which we saw in the boards with Tata, even with Infosys or with Indigo, etc. But let's look at the future board for which really we have assembled today, what new differences that it is going to bring, how it will be diverse. And so very first, I would like to say, what we do not want is a decorative or a passive board. We are looking a board diversity metrics. What is required is not just women, gender has to be in ethnic, whether it is race, color, or national. As you know, only 7% are foreigners who are directors. Then gender, even gender, because only 11% are women today. And then you get into skill, education, experience, and how to prepare a leadership pipeline for effective succession planning. And if you want to add one director, what quality, skill, and background is required? That what are the gaps? So we need to have a proper diversity metrics to make sure that our requirement for that particular organization are fully met by the diversity that bring in. And independent directors and women directors give us that scope for conducting it. So diversity helps a full proper debate as diverse. It should be as diverse as the society and community that the board serves. The diversity and inclusiveness both are required. While diversity is counting the numbers, inclusiveness is making the numbers count. To tackle critical issues head on, create a problem-solving board, we need to maintain the right amount of creative tension between the board and the management to move the management out of their comfort zone. Need to lead and not micromanage the organization. The directors need to very clearly understand when to take charge, when to partner, and when to stay out of the way. The board committees and their effectiveness, periodic rotation of the board committee members, effective board committee structures, these are very vital for the effectiveness of the board. Independent directors, the Cranfield UK in a survey study just 2 years back brought out that 82% of the independent directors were not clear as to how value is being created in their organization. Just imagine. I mean, how can we help and be part of the board and add value when you're not sure as to how the organization is creating value? And very few understood the critical issues. Even those who understood were unable to take them head on. So there was also, it was seen that they not very clear about the industrial dynamics, whatever industry, whether it is a steel or a petroleum or whatever industry one is in. So there is a better use of social media is required because these now can provide instant dialogue with large audiences, required to manage supply chains. COVID has badly disrupted them. If rigid, we cannot really be shifting gears fast enough. So we require a very supple change. Emphasis on transparency and disclosure and effective whistleblower policy for acts of omission and commission. We need to meet challenges posed by digitization and technology, and we need to see how the key strategies drivers, who are the spot the key strategy drivers, board in the elsewhere. So we need to see how robust risk oversight and explicit risk appetite to execute effective hedging strategy, how these are to be used. Emphasis has to be changed from monitoring and compliance to creativity and innovation. So this is just a very few words as to what really we are trying to look for. IOD has really been busy in training and helping directors move on to a more effective board. So I'm sure at the end of the day today, we are going to learn a lot more from all of you, and we are going to be seeing what really an effective board we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant General J.S. Ahluwalia, for your welcome address. Before I move on to a very special keynote address, I must share that we have about 360 of us in this global webinar. Thank you to all of you for making time for joining us for this. Moving on to the keynote address, which is actually from none other than the very, very distinguished Mr. Amitabh Kant, IAS and Chief Executive Officer of Niti Aayog. Lieutenant General J.S. Ahluwalia, if I could just request the camera off for now. Thank you very much. Thank you. Lieutenant General J.S. Ahluwalia, if you could just put your camera off. Thank you, sir. I think we'll figure that out as we go ahead. Maybe the tech team will help you do that. Moving on to our keynote address and the speaker thereof. Just as I said, Mr. Amitabh Kant is a very, very distinguished personality, and he's someone who's seen as a key driver of a lot of transformational initiatives and strategies that are being worked upon in our country right now, and author of Branding India, an Incredible Story, The Path Ahead, Transformative Ideas for India, Incredible India 2.0, Synergies for Growth and Governance. And I'm also pleased to share with all of you that he's also a distinguished fellow of IOD and the proud recipient of Golden Peacock Transformational Leadership Award. He was supposed to join us live today, but a last-minute cabinet meeting came up. So he's been kind enough to still take our time and send us a video of his. Let's play that keynote address for you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I want to express my gratitude to IOD for organizing this webinar on maximizing board effectiveness and engagement during the pandemic. I'm sure that this webinar will ideate and bring forth innovative and transformative suggestions for the benefit of industry. I want to thank IOD for inviting me, and I'm eager to hear what other esteemed panelists have to say. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID is one of the biggest crises and challenges the country has faced so far. Leadership has become a need of the hour during the pandemic. Under normal circumstances, the line between government and between governance and management is usually clearly defined and understood. But in a crisis, boards are challenged with towing an ever-moving line. Having said that, the board's role should always be to support management in the right way, to act as a great facilitator, as a catalyst at the right time, without trying to manage the day-to-day affairs of the company. COVID-19's impact will be felt differently by every company, and boards will have to ramp up or dial back their responses depending on their unique circumstances. Boards will have to move fast, but with caution to prevailing circumstances, and oversee the deployment of crisis management protocols. In these very challenging times, boards of companies will have a substantive role in adapting, innovating, and initiating changes for the benefit of their own companies and industry in general. It is absolutely critical that boards of companies, along with chairpersons and CEOs, think of ways to prepare their organizations to understand and action the value of teamwork, effective communication, and resilience to adapt. Board of companies should have an open and flexible learning mindset. They will need to display courage, consideration, calculation, and definitely decisiveness. Hence, they will need to periodically pause, assess, anticipate, and then act again for the benefit of organization. Board should prepare to challenge management's thinking about how the crisis has fundamentally shifted business operations and which changes will impact the company's strategic direction. Boards will need to grapple with how to adapt to a new environment and what the new normal holds for legacy businesses and even work cultures and organizations that may have been the norm. Though this pandemic, let me say that because of this pandemic, boards will be defined and judged by how well they set the tone for the organization and how well they model that tone themselves. Embodying aspirational values will inspire and instill confidence in the company. Boards that act fast to reinforce a strong, compassionate, and positive culture with both internal and external stakeholders stand to benefit the most during the post-crisis. It is important to remember that the future of the organization is intrinsically tied to the future of work, and effective boards help widen the lens of possibility with respect to the workforce and workplace by posing critical questions to help guide related strategies. Boards have an integral role to play in understanding the immediate needs and responses of the organization, while challenging and supporting management in actions to drive long-term security, surety, and sustainability. In this environment, the focus should be on actions that are imperative for the boards to support the future of work agenda. Companies need to proactively strategize and plan for the what, who, where, and how of a shifting work landscape, expanding their future of work portfolio over time. As the workforce changes, boards can use technology to monitor the pulse of the changing work environment to help empower current and future talent. Boards often strive to achieve greater diversity, can also seek to improve diversity and inclusion within the workforce, generally by bringing in voices from across generations and talent models, including alternative workers such as the gig worker, the freelance worker, the contractors, and listen to diverse perspectives. And this will help them drive innovation and engagement while fostering an inclusive environment. They will need to provide options for ongoing virtual work options, addressing and bolstering immediate needs for technology and connectivity, and implementing new ways of looking at the jobs and interaction within the organizational ecosystem. Navigating disruptions which have arisen in this new normal will lead to improved marketing positioning and brand value. The success of this strategy will essentially determine the return to work in the future of work. The future of work is not only a management issue, it is interrelated and interconnected to the metrics and outcomes of the organization. Finally, it is equally critical for the boards to maintain a progressive, forward-looking agenda and stay focused on the long term. The board is most impactful when serving as a thought partner to management, reminding them of the importance of staying close to key customers and clients, and helping them think through what the business and customer franchise ought to do after the dust settles. Ladies and gentlemen, history demonstrates that the most significant shifts in the sector's competitive rankings occur during moments of crisis and uncertainty, with winners differentiated by their ability to play offense and defense, prioritizing discussions that contribute to the company's recovery narrative, seizing opportunities to better stakeholders' needs, and reminding executives that putting people before profit typically will pay you off in the end and will give you rich rewards. It is important to maintain momentum throughout a recovery period like we are in right now. We should be committed to achieving worthwhile and transformative outcomes in these times in all our respective capacities. The next few months are important for this, and we must use this time optimally. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I look forward to a very, very enriching discussion. Thank you so much.
sharing such deep insights over an issue and clearly enriching us with all the knowledge you have. I'm sure the IOD family has a lot to take back from this keynote address. We will now move forward to our panel discussion, which is going to talk about maximizing board's effectiveness and engagement amid pandemic. And we are deeply honored to have amongst us Mr. Dhinendra Kumar, retired IAS, Chairman Committee on National Competition Policy of India, former Chairman Competition Commission of India, and Secretary to Government of India, Executive Director, World Bank, to take this panel discussion forward. But before I actually hand over to Mr. Dhinendra, I just have two updates to give to all of you who are present in this webinar. One, that we got a call from the Chairman's office at Steel Authority of India Limited, where he's regretted that he's been suddenly called for a meeting in the ministry, so the CMD will not be able to join us. And the other is that the MD and CEO of PSC, Mr. Chauhan, will actually be joining us at 4:15 p.m. Nevertheless, we'll get to hear him at that point of time. With this update, I would like to now invite Mr. Dhinendra Kumar to please come forward for the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Ritika. Good afternoon, friends, and good morning to our friends in other time zone. I saw Stephen in UK and various other countries, whatever time zones they are. First of all, my huge compliments to the IOD, to General Ahluwalia, and my good old friend, a very dynamic Mr. Ashok Kapoor, the DG of the IOD. I don't know where from do they get the energy to organize such big conferences and be attended and on such relevant themes. I am so delighted that today we are going to discuss in whatever time we have a very relevant topic, the role of the board of directors, how to effectively engage with their managements during the time of pandemic. Nothing could be more relevant today. And we have a dream panel with us with several retired secretaries in the government of India. The two of them were former secretaries in the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Mr. Saurabh Chandra, and we had, I hope we are being joined by our other friend, the other secretary, former secretary in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Ajay Dua. I couldn't see his name yet, but anyway, his name was there initially. And we have Mr. Rahul Sareen, and we have Stephen Page. The panel is extremely distinguished, so we are privileged to have this kind of a panel. Friends, as General Ahluwalia has said and Amitabh Kant alluded further, we are passing through very unprecedented and critical times. Probably never in the history of the mankind. Well, the last one was 1918, the influenza pandemic. But in the last 100 years at least, the mankind has not witnessed the kind of changes that we are witnessing today. COVID-19 has impacted our daily lives, the way we are living, the way we are conducting our business. Everything it has transformed for the worse or for the better, whatever depends on how do we have to say. Some people say that these are times when we can reinvent ourselves. Yes, we should. But right now, we are passing through a huge crisis when we have to see how to stay ahead of the curve. In this kind of a situation, the managements, the CEOs are trying to stay afloat and take care of their HR resources, take care of their personnel, to see that they do not and they do not have to suffer any casualties in so much as that anybody getting infected by this, there is an absence of at least 14 days. So we have to save them. We have to keep up their morale. HR issues have become very important. The health issues of the staff, the executives become very important. One is also to take care of standbys, any eventualities. If somebody is quarantined, then who's their work, who will handle, and so on. All those issues one has to take care. In this kind of a situation, when the management is passing through very stressful times, the role of the board becomes extremely important. The board is one management, the and more generally the shareholders look at with lot of confidence and lot of hope. In the annual general meeting, for example, the shareholders look towards the board for the accuracy of the account statements, and similarly in the board meetings, the executives there look towards the board for a guidance which, in accordance with the management's general practices, can steer the company forward. In this situation, I would only like to add that the role of the board should not be stepping onto the toes of the management in their day-to-day running of the company, who are already stressed, but to provide them support, guidance, and in a manner do it that their morale is kept high. The board, by virtue of their experience, by virtue of their innovation and whatever links they have had earlier or now, they should be better prepared to know what are the changing regulations of the government, what are the various policies of the government, the incentives, whatever government is trying to do for the industry, so that they can bring in whatever the company can benefit from in terms of the latest regulations, the policies and procedures, and keep the efforts of the management in tune with those policies in order to gain the maximum out of it. The board has to see how best they can add value, and in doing so, they should devise their own checklist. They should not be asking questions which would add to the stress load of the management, but in their own checklists, the managements do prepare matrices on their reporting to the CEO or CEO reporting to the chairman. So within that, if there could be some select parameters which could form the basis of reporting to the board and also the frequency of reporting to the board, it would be useful for the management also and for the board to be informed. Communication is the key in these times. So if the critical parameters are informed to the board from time to time, they could possibly add value and they could provide the guidance to the management by their long experience and by their knowledge of the market, how best they can benefit the management. In terms of the responsibility of the directors, under the Indian company law, we know that section 166 of the company, it talks about avoidance of the conflict of interest under any situation. And then section 134, and there are long sections I don't wish to read out for paucity of time. Section 134 talks about the accuracy and completeness of the accounting. So we have to make sure that the directors are aware of their responsibility and also their fiduciary responsibility. So in the normal times, those would be the kind of support measures which they would be giving to the management. Although in normal times, in the times of crisis, I'm tempted to refer to a particular incident when I was on the board of directors of the World Bank, and there was a serious complaint against the CEO of the World Bank, the president of the World Bank, and the board conducted an inquiry, and those allegations are found to be correct. And after detailed examination and giving opportunity to the CEO, the board had decided, I remember this was the midnight, to sack the CEO. This was unprecedented, never in the history of the board of directors in the World Bank. a president of the World Bank was sought to be dismissed. An informal word was sent to the president, and if I may say so, to the other people who were concerned with the appointment of the president of the World Bank, and he put in his papers before the morning. The point I'm trying to make that the board of directors also has a responsibility during extreme situations of crisis to take whatever measures are necessary to discharge its responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility. In this case, the independent directors would have to the minority shares, and those others who are representing a particular group, whatever group they are responsible to. Finally, I would say that in this kind of a situation, it would be important for the members of the board to keep an eye and to be alert all the time what the other companies, the competitors are doing in terms of the new technologies which they may be adopting, in terms of skilling, reskilling of the workers, in terms of the new businesses pivot, which they would feel that it would these would be synergistic with the new lines of business, adding new revenue streams for the company. So it could be very useful for the board to keep their eyes and ears open all the time. And as they say, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. And this applies equally to the management, to the CEOs, but more so to the board. And they have to make sure that they help the management in navigating through very disruptive and difficult situations in a manner that it helps them, and they also find in them friend, philosopher, and guide. And the personnel also, they also look to them indirectly through the management for any help which would be needed at a difficult time. Well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and privilege, IOD, General Ahluwalia, and Mr. Ashok Kapoor, to share some of my thoughts. And it's really a privilege to address such a distinguished audience and to share the platform with such a distinguished panel. Thank you so much indeed, Ritika. Back to you. Thank you. Can I now invite, or should I, would you be inviting? Can I invite the next, yes, Ritika.
Yes, Mr. Kumar, if you could just do the honors and invite all the speakers, please.
Sure. So if you permit me, may I request Mr. Saurabh Chandra, who is a very distinguished name and in the civil service, and he has a long stint in the industry. He was secretary in the government of India in the Ministry of Industry. He is currently also chairman of MCX, Multi Commodity Exchange of India. He is independent director on the board of JK Cements and State Bank of India pension funds. He is member of the advisory board of Vedanta Limited. So, Mr. Saurabh Chandra, it's a pleasure and privilege to have you and hear you now on this subject. Over to you. Thank you, Saurabh.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, as Ritika pointed out, the defining feature of this pandemic is uncertainty. Uncertainty caused by the fear of the unknown. Not much is known about COVID-19. For example, there is little unanimity on the source of the pandemic, how it originated, where it originated, mode of its transmission, when and how it will end, how to treat it, when a vaccine would come, whether it would be effective, and if at all, if we are moving towards herd immunity, what is the threshold level of it? In this time of uncertainty, countries have experimented with different measures to contain the spread of the pandemic. These measures have varied in their scope and intensity. The fallout of these measures, however, has a common thread running through them. economic activity has been adversely affected. Most corporates have been negatively impacted, though in varying degrees. The storm may be the same, but the boats and crew are different. Boards have the responsibility to lead their company through this turbulence. Riding through the storm will test the mettle, character, and ability of the company leadership. Tough, unpleasant decisions will have to be taken. Salary cuts is just one example. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have to lead the orchestra, you have to turn your back to the audience. Companies which weather the storm successfully will emerge stronger with greater competitive advantage and a bigger moat around their operations. Uncertainty breeds anxiety. Anxiety often leads to panic and knee-jerk reactions. This is the first port of call for the leadership. Through their actions and behavior, they have to set an example. As Rudyard Kipling said, keeping their head when all about you is losing theirs. In the face of uncertainty, the first instinct is to take a maximalist position. The tendency to overreact has to be curbed. Knee-jerk reactions have to be avoided. Very often, faced with a crisis, we jump from a plane and then start looking around for a parachute. Action very often precedes identification of reasons for taking it. Controlling this instinct may sound ironical, since prompt and decisive action is the need of the hour. Decision-making in a crisis is what separates the men from the boys. The corporate leadership has to recognize that in such situations, System 2 thinking is the need of the hour. According to Daniel Kahneman, System 2 is that aspect of the operating system of the brain which is deliberative, effortful, conscious, and logical. Handling complexity and navigating through conflicting data and opinions requires reflection, deliberation, discussion, and analysis. As opposed to this, System 1 thinking is fast, instinctive, emotional, effortless, and unconscious. Depending on which mode of thinking is being adopted, the same inputs will give different results. People will react differently to the same situation. Best results can be achieved by marrying System 2 thinking with timeliness of decisions. Before moving on to what specifically needs to be done, I would like to mention a few seldom discussed pitfalls to be avoided by boards, more so while taking decisions in contingencies caused by COVID-like situation. Number one, isomorphic mimicry, which is imitating the best practices of some other corporate. One size does not fit all. The problems faced by each corporate are unique and are different. You have to beware of cognitive biases, in particular, anchoring, availability, sunk cost bias, and loss aversion. Beware of football goalkeeper's dilemma, the belief that in a crisis you cannot be seen as doing nothing, even if you do nothing. So you have to do something. This may be good optics, but would be of little use in helping the company tide over the crisis. The fallacy of centrality. One does not know everything. Avoid blind spots. Remember, absence of evidence does not mean evidence of absence. If you don't know what your competitor is doing, it doesn't mean that he's doing nothing. With this background, from my experience, let me list out the 5 priority areas for decision making. Firstly, connect. Connect, I'm using the word deliberately, not communicate. Connect is a lot more than communication. It means understanding the needs of the stakeholders, be empathetic to them, compassionate. For this, you have to regularly communicate with all the stakeholders. There has to be two-way communication because of the importance of the feedback. Engage early. Silence is often counterproductive. Secondly, plan for the long term and the short term. In a rapidly changing ecosystem, you have to think on your feet. Collective experience and expertise will be on test. For example, in MCX, we are taking it month by month and taking decisions accordingly. Thirdly, decide on the level of risk that your company can take. What is the risk appetite of the company? How much are you willing to risk? You see, leadership is all about purpose and risk, taking risks for the right purpose. Question is, what is the purpose? How much risk you're willing to take? Lead from the front to change mindsets and attitudes. Change is often resisted because it makes people uncomfortable by disturbing the current reality. However, systems, beliefs, and practices, all elements of the organization culture have to mutate to be aligned with the strategy adopted for addressing the new reality. As Peter Drucker famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Continuously review corporate policies, especially those related to risk management, human resources, and cybersecurity to mitigate the detrimental impact on manpower, supply chains, and financials, to name a few. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 pandemic displays the characteristic of a wicked problem, a term used in social planning by Rittel and Weber in a very famous landmark paper in 1973. Wicked problems are subject to the no stopping rule. There is no final solution. Resolving it is an iterative process through a series of interventions. Each intervention will lead to a fresh set of problems. Saving lives at the cost of livelihoods is one example which most countries have followed. Resilience and grit for the long haul, creating a climate where people can lead with or without authority, developing a capacity and willingness to absorb bad news, and adaptation to a constant state of flux are but a few necessary conditions to handle the consequences of this black swan event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chandra, for those words of yours. Thank you so much. It was really a delight hearing you. Mr. Dhanendra Kumar, can we please have you back with your camera and your mic on, please? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Move forward and introduce the next speaker.
Yes, before I do that, let me also add a word of compliment to Mr. Saurabh Chandra. I really enjoyed your presentation. It gave an overview of the new normal and how the corporates are facing the challenges of the new normal. Thank you very much for that. So with this, may I invite Mr. Rahul Sarin. Are you there, Mr. Sarin? May I invite Mr. Rahul Sarin?
Yes,
Rahul,
I'm here.
yes, thanks a lot. Rahul has been a secretary in the government of India, and he was a secretary in charge of the most important portfolio for the IAS officers, and the personnel. He was the secretary of that ministry. He also was a member of the Competition Appellate Tribunal. When I was the chairman of the Competition Commission, he used to hear appeals from the Competition Commission sitting in the appellate body. And he is currently an independent director of the Reliance Capital and also in the Airport Economic Regulatory Authority Appellate Tribunal. There he was, I forgot to mention it. So he's got a vast experience, Rahul. We are looking forward to hear your views. What do you have to say about this subject in the new normal? Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Yes, carry on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your kind words.
Mr. Sareem, Mr. Sareem, if you could just sit a little away from your screen because your face is getting cut.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day to all the participants. It's my honor and privilege to be here today and speaking on this very topical subject of maximizing board effectiveness and engagement during the times of pandemic. Let me start with Confucius. Confucius often believed that wisdom is what we know and also to know what we don't know. In today's world, we know that COVID pandemic has pressed the reset button on how we live, on how we work, on how we learn and how we play. But what we don't know is what is the impact and effect of COVID will be, how long it will last, and what is the trajectory going to be of recovery. So in this period of transition and uncertainty, our first task is to survive, is to stay alive, and also to thrive in this climate. So what's the way forward? Way forward is possibly how we reimagine ourselves, how we see all the agents of economic change, the government, the households, the firms and the corporates, the regulators, how they all evolve in this, the new reality. The new normal, as the chairman mentioned, actually it's not the new normal. The new normal is only the interim normal, because we know for the next 18 to 24 months, we have to pause. We have to start to rethink, to relearn, and reimagine how business, how economic activity will go forward. Coming to corporate governance and management, as we have heard the other speakers before us, that the line between boards management and the actual functioning of the companies is getting blurred. One reason could possibly be because of regulatory forbearance, because everything now starts coming to the board. For instance, many regulators insist every report needs to come to the board. Maybe it's not a good thing at all. Some of the other areas in which we need to focus attention on is definitely, as Saurabh also mentioned, one is risk management. In the times of COVID, it has emerged very clearly that putting in place systems for risk management and how to deal and mitigate the risks is of very, very critical importance. How do we place and make and establish a risk dashboard which looks at possibly things like business risks, credit risk, legal and compliance risks, information technology risks. All these things we need to have frameworks. We need to put in place systems which with embedded triggers which immediately get set off and corrective measures come in place. These are the new challenges which we definitely need to look at. One other area which we need to look at from the perspective of the board and corporate governance is definitely revamping of organizational structures. The organizational structures which were typically pyramidal are now bound to change. The structures now are likely to be more like an Eiffel Tower with very broad-based systems and only a thin line of top layers. There are dangers that mid-level management will go. This also is relevant when we talk of the future of work. As we understand, and this has been brought out very clearly by Jasprit Bindra in his famous, the author of the famous book, The Tech Whisperer, that offices, the transition from offices to work from home and work from anywhere is already visible. And this is the natural way of the future of work. We have already seen that work from home is not just a necessity now, it's also a statement which is very evident from what Twitter says. They have permanently absorbed work from home. Tata Consultancy Services says 75% work from home. Facebook says 50%, and there are innumerable examples. Now, even work from home is transmigrated to work from anywhere. Things like there are the days of big corporate offices, head offices is already over. Now there will be decentralized offices or small pods all over the city, and people will start working there. Work from anywhere also means you can work from the nearby cafe, the nearby park, or the co-working spaces, meeting rooms, which will themselves be decentralized in the future. These things are already happening. We recently had one of our board members attending a board meeting virtually while he was traveling. These are things which are actually happening. And this is the way in which the boards need to address these issues in the future. The nature of jobs also is likely to change, and it is changing. As I mentioned earlier, mid-level rung may just disappear. What will take its place will be people with greater energy, better skills, and at lesser costs. Also, the nature of jobs will change. There may be much lesser career jobs, no permanent jobs, only contracts. This was also briefly mentioned by Mr. Amitabh Kant. This is the future. There may be more flexible arrangements, like, for instance, people asked to work for limited hours, and but given the ability to take up alternate jobs, compensation may be fixed on the basis of hours put in place. These are real issues staring before us. I think we in the corporate sector need to actively engage ourselves on this. I would also like to bring to attention the digital nature and the digital future. We have seen internet for all is already happening. Digital transformation is taking place in such a rapid way, and this is where the paradox of pandemic is. while it has slowed down everything, but the pandemic has accelerated this change, digitization, which we see it in all spheres of our activity, in service delivery, in retail, in all these sectors. But this is something which is going to accelerate further. Digital identity is going to be a reality now. Digital identity on the basis of a digital right will come. Digital trust needs to be accelerated by using technology which has a positive response only. Then digital security, as I mentioned, data security and use of greater data needs to be promoted. Finally, let me say the last word is the boards need to put in place design thinking when they have to come up with disruptive solutions. In the current period of transition and uncertainty, where the World Economic Forum in a recent report said that more than 58% chances are there where there will be a prolonged global recession, and 44% chances of a high unemployment levels will persist, and about 35% industries are not likely to recover. This is on the basis of analysis made by 375 analysts. They have recently, on 22nd July, come up with this report. In this environment, what is needed most is disruptive solutions. And for disruptive solution, what we need is design thinking. And boards, the management, they need to get together, put in their own teams. The distinction between board and management will disappear further. Yes, but we need to do that. This is the need of the hour. This has to be done. Lastly, I would also like to mention that the productivity and creativity equation is changing. The use of technology for promoting productivity is what is happening today. We are seeing AI, we are seeing big data, we are seeing all emerging technologies giving a great boost to productivity. But what we need now is, as Scott Belsky has come up with, is that the time and energy spent on creativity is far more useful than the time and energy spent on productivity. Meaning that the technology will take care of the productivity. But human beings need to add value. They need to come up with creative solutions by the capacity of thinking. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Rahul, for a very comprehensive description of the new normal. You have described the way the new normal is rolling out. Even this conference is being held on a virtual platform, how meetings are held, how work from home, the surge in e-commerce, for example. With this result that we have somebody now, the world's richest man of the Amazon, adding 53 crore rupees per minute. He is, God knows how more rich he is going to be anyways. But this also brings me to one small point before I pass it on to the new speaker, that it also is presenting new challenges. And the challenge, for example, in security, the data security, when everything is being done virtually, all the documents are being sent virtually, the transactions are happening virtually, the data security is something which is becoming extremely important, but this is not the time to talk about it. But these are all parts of the new normal. So may I now, I noticed that we have about 25 minutes left, Ritika, and we have two more speakers now with us, Mr. Stephen Page and Dr. Aruna Sharma. So and we wanted to leave a few minutes for Q&A. So if I can request about 7 to 8 minutes for each speaker. And with that, if I could invite Mr. Stephen Page, if he could share his thoughts, and more of his thoughts he could share in his special address later. So can I request you, Mr. Stephen Page? He is the head of EMEA Board Engagement in Nasdaq Governance Solutions, and he is also one of those who is kindly supporting us. So over to you, Mr. Stephen Page.
Thank you very much. Can I make sure you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I just lost what they say about Sod's Law, because I just lost my connection about 2 minutes ago, but I'm back with you. So it's good to know that you can hear me. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and hello, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you today on what is a very prestigious occasion. I really genuinely am humbled by my fellow distinguished panelists, and I'm privileged to have this opportunity to address you all today. I want to talk to you about the notion of responsible business and how that affects business decisions. I think the pandemic, as anything, accelerated this process, the view being that corporate reform is necessary and that businesses should use this opportunity to rethink their business models and the way of doing things. This is certainly an expectation that business has, and I think we need to take account of that. And to this end, the demand for businesses to be more responsible or purposeful, and by extension for boards to embrace shareholder or stakeholder capitalism, is growing everywhere. But what does it actually mean in practice is what people talk to me about. I receive material from the likes of McKinsey, London Business School, Harvard, PwC, and barely a day goes past without there being at least one article concerning responsible business. But here's the thing. Rarely, if ever, is responsible business or stakeholder capitalism defined in a meaningful way. And when I say meaningful, I mean a way that allows boards to make informed decisions, in particular about their capital allocation. Despite what may be seen as a lack of clarity, pressure is clearly building on boards to engage with and satisfy their stakeholders. As a minimum, to me, this means directors should be speaking to different stakeholder groups, each group pursuing its own special interest. But you know what? They're each pushing for a bigger slice of the pie. So what should CEOs, executive directors, and non-executives do when faced with a call to operate as a responsible business, in effect to embrace stakeholder capitalism? We can all agree, I think, that commercial businesses must generate sufficient profits for their activities to fund their business, which means also including funding development, research, and innovation. Profits are as important to companies as air and food are to humans. Businesses cannot survive without profits, and no one benefits from a bankrupt company. It's clear, though, that the notion of short-term profit maximization is under pressure. If businesses do not make a better case for benefiting society, they risk losing their social license to operate. What I want to do in the remaining minutes is to sketch out what I hope will be a meaningful definition of stakeholder capitalism, and to talk about an actionable framework that can be used by boards when making investment decisions. Now, I'm passionate about grounding definitions that I use in reality, using definitions that are meaningful and actionable. When talking to boards about responsible capitalism, this means making it clear that this fully embraces the need to generate profits as well as creating value for other stakeholders. Stakeholder capitalism, which also includes things such as responsible capitalism or purposeful capitalism, is not an either-or situation. It's not about profit or purpose, or profit or ESG, or even worse than that, versus stakeholders. It's about profit and purpose. Creating adversaries, the notion that creating value for stakeholders somehow means less profits for investors, completely destroys value for everyone. It's a zero-sum game. This is not what stakeholder capitalism should be about. I'm very happy to provide links to anyone that's interested to leading peer-reviewed academic research that underpins what I'm saying today. It's really important that people understand there's a wealth of evidential material backing stakeholder capitalism, or at least as I define it here. One of the leading studies took over 3 years for a professor who actually I deal with to complete, and involved him and his team looking at thousands of companies over 28 years of data. So let's define stakeholder capitalism, which I say is a term embracing responsible business and purposeful business. I would define stakeholder capitalism thus. It's quite short. It's a system by which companies are motivated to create long-term value for material stakeholders, with profits being a byproduct. This can be contrasted with shareholder capitalism, or enlightened shareholder value, if you prefer, which can be defined as a system by which companies are motivated by profit maximization, with stakeholder value being a product. Just to repeat that, it's not just a play on words. Stakeholder capitalism is about creating long-term value for material stakeholders, and profit is a byproduct, whereas shareholder capitalism is about maximizing profits with stakeholder value being a byproduct. So what we are saying is that a responsible business should look to create long-term value for its material stakeholders and its investors. What academic research shows us is that if companies focus on creating long-term value for their stakeholders, this will more likely than not generate more profit than would have been the case if they had focused on profit maximization alone. This is incredibly powerful. What we're saying here is that there is strong academic evidence pointing to companies being more profitable, not less profitable, if they look to create long-term stakeholder value for their material stakeholders. It really is a win-win situation. But there is an important condition. To create long-term stakeholder value, boards must use a framework when they make their investment decisions. This is because trade-offs are always necessary. Not every stakeholder will benefit to the same extent from every decision. Indeed, there will sometimes be occasions when one stakeholder loses out completely, for example, if there are redundancies. I don't really have time today to talk in detail about the nature of the framework required, other than to say that it is practical and doesn't involve directors having to work with complicated spreadsheets, quite a reverse in fact. Being a responsible business is about establishing priorities. Establishing an actionable framework for boards is key to making board decisions, but it does mean some investments will be rejected. To repeat, businesses cannot operate effectively without making trade-offs. Anyone who says otherwise, I'm afraid, will be selling you snake oil. Ultimately, of course, it's still about companies needing to be excellent in everything they do, about boards being effective when they make investment decisions. The need for excellence never goes away. It still remains the case today that the most effective way for a company to be purposeful and responsible, i.e. to be of benefit to society, is to be excellent in delivering its services or products. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Mr. Dhanendra, we can't hear you. Your mic, yeah, you need to unmute that.
All right, okay, let me see.
Yeah, we can hear.
Now you can hear me?
Yes, sir, but now we can't see you. Okay, now we have you completely.
No. Let me just see. Thanks to the technological platform, occasionally it shows its swings of mood. Is it okay now?
Yes, sir, absolutely fine. Absolutely fine now.
So the swings of the technology's mood is very important in this age. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. You gave us such a good overview, mentioned a number of things within the time that you spoke. So we are looking forward to hearing more of you in this special presentation. Thanks a lot for that. That brings us to the last but not the least, a very, very important panelist. Dr.
So Dhanendra Kumar, there is an update we've got. If I could just screen in 15 seconds for that, because it's really important for your panel. We are very delighted that finally Mr. Ashish Kumar Chauhan, MD and CEO of the Stock Exchange, has been able to make it. And he's been able to make time to join us for this IoT Global Webinar. webinar, and he's present with us. A very, very warm welcome to you, Mr. Chauhan. Really, we're looking forward to having you. Thank you for making time. Over to you, Mr. Dhanendra, once again.
Thank you, Ritika. We are delighted to have Mr. Ashish Chauhan. In this age, nothing more important and delightful to have the CEO of the Bombay Stock Exchange with us. When the stock exchange is going northwards and mostly northwards, sometimes southward, all of us, they are very keenly attuned to see the behavior of the stock exchange. Anyways, we'll talk about that later. So may I, for the time being, invite my distinguished friend and colleague, Dr. Aruna Sharma, to share her thoughts on this subject. Dr. Aruna Sharma, she has also been a secretary in the government of India, and she is a member of the Digitization Committee of the Reserve Bank of India. She is independent member of the Microfinance Institution Network, and she is also an independent director of the Jindal Steel and Power, one of the most prominent companies. So, may I request you, Dr. Aruna Sharma, to kindly share your thoughts on this very important subject. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair, IOD, and my co-panelists. I hope you are able to hear me clearly.
Yes, ma'am.
So definitely the topic is chosen well and very, very important at this stage. I would like to take it further from what Mr. Stephen talked about, the stakeholders and their importance. To that stakeholders, I would like to add on your employees as well as your contract low-level workers. Because when the board of directors is looking at in these difficult circumstances, one thing of engagement which I found it very effective and my colleagues found it very effective is to have more frequent meetings, and the virtual platform is enabling you to do that. And there what you are looking forward is the constant changing scenario during lockdown, unlocking, as well as the various packages which the government is offering. And what it needs is a critical analysis whether one should go for it or one should not go for it, and how to ensure that the fire keeps burning in these difficult times so that the organization is able to earn at least to pay off its employees and whatever statutory things they have to pay. Now, if you look at it, why I'm flagging these issues very, very clearly, because it has been really very important that if I divide the organizations into three, one is the one which is in the manufacturing sector. Now, in the manufacturing sector, you have to be in the market, you have to continue manufacturing, and therefore you have to find new markets as well as retain the old markets. Yes, when the lockdown was there, when your logistics is not working, when transport is not working, your inventory is lying dead, it is a very big challenge. Similarly, if you look at the fintech sector, which had a big advantage of becoming more popular, more digitization, more digital payments, but it was hit very badly of non-incomes of the your clients, where you are given huge credits under the microfinance, and yet you have to give them an informed decision. And the third category where I'll put the industry is in the service sector, where the revival is looking very, very difficult, whether it is tourism, whether it is looking after your retail sectors, whether it is looking after your malls and the cinema halls and everything, which will take a much, much longer time to come back into business. So under this scenario, what is very important, I strongly feel, and have experienced it with a little success, that the board of directors will have to have a holistic view into where their company is standing, bring to the drawing board, work out the short-term measures, analyze the benefits which the government is offering. And why I'm saying so, the moratorium which was offered onto the term loans, it has to be taken very carefully because the interest subversion was not there at all. So whether it makes, if you have little money, whether it makes sense to pay off your EMIs or whether it makes sense to take advantage of the moratorium has to be a very, very calculated kind of a decision making when we're moving ahead with it. Similarly, the working capital is needed because that is where many of the companies were stuck. The banks were reluctant to come forward in spite of the push by the RBI, in spite of the push by the finance ministry. And that is where one-to-one dialogues are taken by the regular CEOs and the owner of the company. But the board of directors has to ensure that the balance sheets that is presented or argument that is presented is something which is convincing for that flow of working capital which is thought of to the company. So that is something, a very big challenge which the company is facing at this moment of time. But I must say, with the unlocking, the industry is reviving. Some industries are going for the V curve, which is a very, very good, especially in the steel sector and the microfinance sector. It is really amazing to see that even the clients in microfinance sector, only 30% opted for moratorium. And why so? Because they were given an informed information as to what kind of an impact it is going to have into their payment and how much extra they will have to pay. So all this scenario you have to work upon. The biggest challenge which is coming now today is for the workers and keep the morale of the employees. There has been a little delayed payment. In some sectors, there has been a cut into their salaries. There could be, maybe you are keeping the people on shelf or a wait time. And there could be that the migrant workers have disappeared and you have to attract them back. So it is very important that a short-term and a long-term clear-cut vision has to be presented to the employees and the workers, that whether the company is going to sink or there is a possibility in the long term to come back to its original position and maybe accelerate its profits as it is moving ahead. And with this kind of a scenario, definitely there is a help. There is a need to have a better healthcare facilities, which was maybe some companies were very active into it, but some companies were not flagging it as one of their important expenditure items, and that has to go for it. So if you look at the independent director's role into it, it is a holistic approach where you keep the gas burning, as I said, so that your income is continuing. You accelerate and get the new business, the new market, and in the new normal, it is very important to bring into automation as much as possible, which is very, very important because it will become less and less human intervention dependent. And definitely it will have its impact on the employment or the number of people which any company will be engaging. But there are few areas where the human touch cannot be avoided. So you need a proper skilling, retention as you're going in. So under these circumstances, when you are working ahead in these sectors, what is very, very important that the stakeholders is all of them. You have to protect their interest by bringing in your experience. Bring back the company under the V graph, which you can come only if you have an eye on the competitors, if you find out what's happening in the competitors in domestic market as well as across the globe. And this success is going to go a long way. So the future is more digitized, more automated, more virtual meetings, but there are places where the physical work is a must. The fund flow is a major challenge which everybody is facing today. So how best you manage your finances, that is where the challenge is again lying with all the companies, and come back to your positioning in this sector as you're going ahead. I'm quite happy to say that the core sectors, that is your steel, aluminium, as well as your fintech is coming into a V curve, which will be going ahead very in an accelerated way, keeping the fingers crossed. And there are sectors which are producing challenges. So you have to see and you have to look at in the policy making as to how it works. The one last point I will also make, it is equally important for independent directors to flag the issues and create an echo of the policy changes that are required. The extension of moratorium period was one such challenge, which was very well handled by all the stakeholders. Ultimately, RBI agreeing to it, no further extension, because that would have hit the market very, very badly if we would have gone for more and more extension of the moratorium periods as we are moving in. So I'm just giving this example as to how policy making and policy requirements will also have to be influenced, where the independent directors can really help the companies to make that case and move ahead. So I think I'll stop at this stage, and if there are any questions, most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arunaji. That was a delightful presentation, and you made some very important points about the automation, and we all hear about the inclusion of robotics in the operations, and you also made about some mention about the looking at the competition and competitors. As the former chairman of the Competition Commission of India, nothing would please me more to see that there is greater competition and more competitors are coming up with new innovative ways of increased competition, better technologies, better products, and so on. So great. Thanks a lot for this very interesting presentation. We also have with us Mr. Ashish Chauhan, the Bombay Stock Exchange, and we have been very keenly looking forward to hear you, Mr. Chauhan. So although now the time left is not too much, but we like to hear you in full and hear your thoughts. How do you feel? Now you have an overview sitting at the Bombay Stock Exchange. How do you feel that the boards can engage with the managements in these times of pandemic to give a greater board oversight, more effective board oversight? So over to you, Ashish. Can you hear us? Hello?
Yeah. Sorry, sir. Good afternoon, respected Sri Dharendra Kumarji, respected Sharma. Friends, it's an honor to be in front of you once again at the Institute of Directors. For me, there are many aspects which we can cover. One of them, Dharendra Kumarji said that what the boards should be doing with the management. The way I look at it is the modern framework, the modern societies are built on what I call the framework participation. Participation, especially in the financial situation, especially for
I think there seems to be some sort of a technical network issue from his side. I think we'll try and get Mr. Chauhan back. We'll just wait for a few seconds if we can get him back. Mr. Dhanendra Kumar, just in case we can't get him back, in the meanwhile, would you like to begin the Q&A so that when we get him back, we can actually resume without losing time? Should we do that?
It's in the Q&A, and then request Mr. Ashish Chauhan to join if it's okay with you.
Yeah.
So I can see there are a number of questions which have come, and some of the questions are directed towards specific panelists. So maybe I could take up a few of them depending on the availability of time. There was one question which was directed to Rahul Sareen by one Ravi. What are the best practices so far known on board's intervention in the last 6 months? What is the emerging change in board practices? Would you like to mention something about it, Rahul? Can you hear me? Mr. Rahul Sareen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Would you like to take this question?
I hear you. Yes.
Can you take this question briefly?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. Over the last 6 months, the changes primarily have been, one, as per SEBI circulars, the provision for virtual meetings. Now, it is important to note that in this virtual meeting, it's not a free for all. In the virtual meeting, first attendance, like a roll call, is taken, and in that roll call, confidentiality and that nobody else has access to these proceedings. These are maintained. This is a very, very important change. This has happened. Then let me also mention the Reliance Capital Limited was probably one of the first big companies to have their AGM on 23rd of June. And AGM was live, online, and it was well attended. And so this is the first major change which is already happened. And second major change is because of COVID, as Aruna mentioned, specifically that the number of board subcommittee meetings has gone up, and the engagement in the subcommittee meetings is really intense, detailed, and more effective. I think this is a good way. Otherwise, normally board meetings used to be held for 4 or 5 hours, and with all presentations put in one place, so there was hardly any actual analysis, discussion, and formative changes for policy making and things like that. Now, the greater focus is on policy making, strategies, and maybe also better team building, better coordination and communication with all levels in the board.
Thank you, Rahul. Can I just take a minute here and mention about something which I had read during my preparation for this webinar? There was a study done by Spencer Stewart, and in the month of April, a number of meetings were held with more than 100 directors representing over 120 large and highly regarded US companies regarding what strategies are being adopted by the directors for more effective oversight. It's a huge paper, but very briefly, better communication between the board and management more often, then changes in the executive and board compensation. At times you have to reduce the compensation in order to also motivate the personnel to accept salary cuts. Emergency succession planning, as I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes there could be situations when key executives or key personnel are hit by COVID and have to be quarantined. So there should be emergency planning for that. Security of data, cadence, format, rationale, documentation, then contingency planning, emergency succession, and looking ahead, what could be the new measures taken up in terms of the emerging technological landscape and the new synergistic lines of business, etc. Anyway, so there are huge studies going on what can be done on this subject. So let's proceed to the, can we take up one more question, Ritika, before we request Ashish Chauhan to join? Is he now available?
Yes, sir. Yes, I think we can take one more question.
So we'll take just one more question. There are a number of questions which are coming up. The one question, for example, the last one is, the mood is now from Mani Padmanabham. The mood is now one of contraction and slight pessimism. Does this add more to the director's plate to aid strategic risk taking? What, by implication, probably they need to say, what can be done by the directors to assist the management in this situation of pessimism and contraction, and to aid strategic risk taking? So would somebody like to take this question? Saurabh, for example, are you there, Saurabh? Can you take this question?
Yes, sir. So in
Sorry.
difficult times,
Yes.
which is what we found, and it's a real example from the multi-commodity exchange, when these trading hours were curtailed between the 30th of March and 22nd of April, and the turnover plummeted. So what do? You cut your losses and try to stay afloat. What is within your control is costs. So across board, whether it was the directors or the senior staff, no increments, 10% cut. We put in place a strategy. Fortunately, the external markets helped us, and the turnover went by 2.5 times by July. So that is the time when we removed these cuts. The idea is to stay nimble, watch the situation. It's very difficult to plan for the long term in uncertainty. You see, the problem with uncertainty is that you can't figure out outcomes. That's the difference between risk and uncertainty. If you can't get the outcomes, how do you attach probabilities to them? How do you plan? So we are in a state of uncertainty. We'll have to wait and watch, take things as they are coming along, and hope for the best. Strategically, you have to change the culture. Culture being, these are adaptive challenges. Mindsets have to change. Attitudes have to change. People have to learn to work from home. People have to learn to be disciplined while they're working from home. Everything is changing. So it's in a state of flux. Nevertheless, what at the moment can be done is what you have within your control, try to control it. There are things which are not under your control. Just see how they develop and take prompt action. So management and the board have to be constantly in touch.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. Are we ready with Ashish Chauhan, or shall we take one more? Ritika?
I'm back, sir.
We have him back with us, so we can request him now to speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll request Ashish to speak now.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
he's there. He's there.
Over to you, Ashish. We are very keenly looking forward to hearing you.
My apologies, sir. I think the technology didn't work at that point in time, but I'm back. So basically, the way I look at it is, especially from the capital market perspective and stock market perspective, that the modern capitalism and the concept of companies as a legal fiction, which all of us believe in as the modern societies across the world, is that it is being run by some people who are called management, and it's being directed by some people who are called board of directors. And of course, the legs, eyes, arms, all are the workmen and the officers of the company. So in effect, when this kind of pandemic or any difficulty of this magnitude comes up, the role of the directors become much more important, because in a way, the modern society works. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So the modern society works basically on the partnership framework or the trust framework. Millions and billions of people, either directly or through funds or pension funds, are investing from across the world into Indian companies. And if the directors of each company do not provide that trust to the people who are investing and also potentially going to invest, that the companies which are currently working have collected money from the markets, have listed themselves, they are working in the right direction within the given constraints, and the directors are actually going through all the pros and cons of every item, every little detail, in addition to being strategic. In normal circumstances, the boards are expected to be on strategic side, on compliance side, and a few other things on and off basis. But today, as Madam Sharma also pointed out, I think Chairman MCX, Mr. Saurabh Chandra also pointed out, the boards are now getting into what I call operational and tactical matters for a very short time. It's not a very long stuff. Hopefully, it will not last long. This COVID, at some point in time, it will get over, and then the boards will continue to go back to their strategic and compliance and other regulatory structures. But today, the boards in India have actually taken charge, and I'm delighted that that has actually brought in tremendous confidence in the investing public. If we cannot kind of espouse that confidence in the public who are investing into shares or who are going to invest potentially, it will also ensure that in future, when these companies come for additional funds or newer companies come for funds, we may not get the investors to invest in. And that's why, for the sake of the modern capitalism, sake of modern societies, it's important that the board of directors take charge, and that in most cases they've taken. So I am delighted that Indian companies have come out, and I think Mr. Chandra mentioned about some of the things they did. My compliments to them for going through very difficult times, and I have been witness to the exchange sector, including the one where he chairs. I think it is a phenomenally good work. And Madam Sharma also talked about many things in getting into details, going into even government policies and all. I think we have wonderfully been as people who are responsible to direct the management. This time it was not about only directing. It was about actually hand-holding, because this kind of framework has never been experienced by Indian companies in last 100 years, probably last even longer. And BSE is existing for 145 years. It's the oldest working public institution in the country. It's older by 10 years compared to even Indian National Congress. And so we have, as an exchange, we have seen lots of ups and downs, but this last 6 months have been amongst the worst periods for management, for boards, for workers, for the society as a whole, about what is going to happen in the future. And I think India, even at a government level, has done unbelievably good job. Many times we blame governments for being inefficient or unresponsive. Today, despite 70 days lockdown, despite additional 80, 90 days of partial lockdowns here and there, there has been no issue of food riots, which many people had predicted. India also, in a way, came out of the basic, what I call, onslaught of pandemic in a very different way, because we learned from other people by going into the complete lockdown. Even China, being a dictatorial communist country, they couldn't go to the full lockdown as a country. We, being a federal democracy, we went into a complete lockdown. And at the end, now we have very small sort of fatality rates per million and so on and so forth. One of the questions which people ask me always, as you rightly started before introducing me, is that the stock market keeps on going up and people are amused. It looked like that people are amused, but there are reasons for why stock markets have gone up. What happens is stock market, in a sort of any point in time, it is theorized that all the information that is available in any domain, anywhere, is covered into the price of the stock. And that's how the price of the index also. But the capital markets don't represent vegetables. They don't represent any other thing. They represent assets which are going to give you profits over the next 30, 40, 50 years. So those profits over those 30, 40, 50 years of that company are almost being made into net present value basis, brought to today, and that's how it is valued. So when there are what I call temporary disruptions like this, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, which are much longer than normal, but still they are not like 40-year disruptions. And that's where the overall, when the information started coming about COVID, many Indian experts or Indian origin experts from America, whom nobody hears in America, came to our many television channels and started saying that India will have 20 crore or 30 crore infections by July, August, and probably few crore will be dead. And that became basically what we call black swan moment. That information was never discounted in the prices. And when it came like a huge bolt from the blue, and people brought down their expectations from the companies and their profits by 40, 50%. That's how index went down from 42,000 to close to 24,000, 25,000. And it went down by 40%. No other business went down by that much, but stock markets predicted that if you are going to have so many millions of infected, or millions of people infected and millions dead, we are going to have real issue even in 30, 40, 50 years. But as and when the lockdown progressed, the entire framework progressed for the COVID, people realized that it is not as bad as it is made out to be, or as bad as people thought it would be, even our experts. And today, although India is having larger number of infections than those days, the worries are over that the world has managed it well. India has even managed it better. And that's where, for me, that worry has gone away. The other more important part, and that's how from 24, 25,000, it has gone up to 39,000 today. And basically, the last part is about the government's own reactions across the world. Last 40, 50 years, when there is a problem, they end up putting a lot of money. And that's what they have done even now. In first 3 months alone, the governments across the world had put in $12 trillion. And that liquidity is chasing the assets which are long-term. which is what the stock market is. And that's how one of the reasons why it has come up is because it was a black swan event. It came in and it went down, and now slowly people figure that it can actually work not so badly. And second is the lot of money that has come in, and that is chasing from the government side, and that's chasing those assets, and that's why the stock market is almost where it was when it started. But in US and other markets, it's actually gone beyond what it started with. And that I just wanted to give you a perspective, although I think somebody wrote that he has swung, I mean, I have swung into a question which was not asked, but I just wanted you to be aware that many economists, many newspapers, televisions are wondering why the real street is in difficulty, why Dalal Street is rejoicing. It is not rejoicing at all. It is basically reflecting the newer realities, and that's what I wanted to just inform all of you. Thank you.
Unmute. Thank you very much, Ashish. That's a very good and comforting thought. The stock market, of course, is going northwards all the time, crossed 39,000 today. Anyways, so Ritika, what's your instruction to us now? Should we close the panel discussion now and wait for...
I'm told that we have 10 minutes, sir. If you would like to take any more questions, we can. We have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I was keen to take up one or two more questions which are interesting. In case you think it's okay, they are interconnected. For example, one question related to whether in these unprecedented times, would it be a good idea for the boards to meet more often to assess impact of COVID-19 on their operations and monitor course correction measures? And the related question was whether boards should spend more time on strategic matters and performance-related matters and less time on statutory matters. So they both are interconnected questions. So if it is okay to take both of them together, first one was from Umesh Pratap, the second one was from Parvati Venkatesh. So if you permit, we can take up both the questions together, and whom I should request. Can I request the former Secretary Industries, Saurabh Chandra, to take up this question? Saurabh, are you there?
I'm here, sir. I'll just start my video.
Can you take up this question? These two questions, rather.
So there was a study, and what are the best boards supposed to do? The best boards are supposed to, one, do strategic planning. Two, do succession planning. Three, look at big transactions. Lower in their priorities should be looking at financial statements. When they come to the board, their history. You're actually only doing a post-mortem there. There's nothing you can do there. Maybe learn a few lessons for the future. What is lower down is compliances. Once again, you're looking at history. In these days, the boards, more than not, are meeting more often. It's easier to meet on the virtual platform. And they are taking up, in some cases, day-to-day problems are springing up, especially HR issues. MDs are writing to chairman. MDs are writing to their board, keeping them apprised, fortnightly letters. But there are times when the boards have to meet. So probably what is happening once a quarter, a board meeting, is happening twice a quarter in certain boards. So other boards where the communication is better, they're still sticking to maybe once a quarter. So it all depends from board to board.
Mr. Dhinendra Kumar, you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Ritika, for pointing it out. There is one question which is directed towards Ashish Chauhan from Ravi Krishnamurthy. What have been instances of the company's board's actions that have enthused confidence in shareholders in these times? So would you like to take up this question, Ashish? Very interesting question.
regulator or quasi-regulator, I don't tell about specific companies, but since it's a meeting of directors or potential directors, there are many companies over last few months, last 6 months specifically, have done wonderfully well to engage with their investors, come out with actions, and also sort of kept them informed. Of course, there are companies which work in public, like Mr. Saurabh Chandra mentioned, MCX. They've been in public and they've taken decisions, as I said, and everyone knows. And that has kept the company afloat and now doing really well. But there are other companies like Reliance, which has done basically over last 6 months. When people were feeling that the entire stock market is going to go to zero, they started working together, created their framework, and then they started actually raising funds where everything was looking so bleak. They ended up giving a lot of hopes to many Indian companies, saying we might be able to raise funds. And there was also there were comments about them raising funds from foreigners and not from Indians. But just to give you a perspective, they raised a huge amount of money. Actually, the largest amount of any public issue, I won't say a public issue, but any issue for Indian investors was also done by them during the COVID call, as I call it, as a rights issue of Reliance, which was almost, they raised probably close to 70,000 crores. Of course, they had to keep a little lower, but effectively, that was the largest issue of any type in India from public. Of course, they have 20-30 lakh shareholders. So, and for me, there are many, many examples of companies. Of course, in current situation, there are winners and there are not so good companies because of circumstances, not because of the credibility of management or the hard work on their part or the lack of the direction on the part of the board. It's just that the circumstances of many companies, specifically the companies which are in tourism or which are in airlines, they had to close that down. And it's very difficult for them to come back again unless the COVID situation arises. But today also I saw, I think Indian hotels sent me a video message saying, now you can come and visit us. And the video was about the hotel employees having the masks and welcoming you and things like that. And so those are the sort of ways the companies have worked under completely difficult circumstances and kept the fire burning. They have gone ahead, raised funds either from banks or from other people. They have kept their production running. They've also kept their supply chain running and so on and so forth. You will find literally hundreds of companies which have done exemplary work. Even that doesn't mean that those companies are doing well financially, because of the fact that they might have been the businesses which are not easy to come up today. But there are I can give you numerous, because we keep on getting those research reports from a variety of equity analysts, which if you go to BSE's website also, you might be able to find on some other connected websites and you might be able to read. But there are many, many companies in India which are doing wonderfully good work in current circumstances.
Thank you very much, Ashish. I think we are running woefully out of time, but just one last question, Ritika, if you permit me, 1 minute. And if I could request Saurabh to answer it in 2 minutes. There was one question which probably would be relevant from Pradeep Kathuria. How is performance of board members measured to ensure effectiveness? So how do you measure effectiveness of the board members? Would you like to take it up very briefly in a couple of minutes, Saurabh?
Well, there's one, each director evaluates the other director. Now one can say it's gamed, could be. But what happens in exchanges, and which is a model which other companies need to follow, is that an independent director gets 3 years on the exchange. He can get another term, but before that he goes in for an external evaluation, a third-party evaluation. But otherwise, it's basically the other directors evaluating your performance, evaluating the performance of the chairperson, and that is it. But the final test is, if it's a listed company, how is your stock price doing?
Yeah.
They know. And corporate governance is perhaps the most important thing which is driving stock prices up. If they have faith in the governance, prices would go up.
Thank you very much, Saurabh. I think with that, we must close the panel discussion. It's already 5 o'clock, and it's time that we hand it over back to Ritika for probably requesting Mr. Stephen Page for his special presentation, if you agree. But if you all agree, we can close this discussion, panel discussion. And with these words, I would like to thank my co-panelists most sincerely for a very delightful, enlightening, and illuminating discussion. Each one of you have really thrown very good light on this subject, and I'm grateful to you. And we really went into some very deep, insightful issues. So with that, once again, thanks to all of you. Back to you, Ritika.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Dhanendra Kumar, for taking it to so well and making it such an interactive session, and the way you were summing every speaker up. And thank you to all our distinguished speakers. Thank you so much, Mr. Ashish Kumar Chauhan, for finally making time and joining us for this IOD special global webinar. Thank you to all of you. And I'm sure none of us actually mind running over time, because we've learned immensely from each of these speakers. Thank you. So now it's time that we move on to a very, very special presentation. And to take this forward, we have with us Mr. Stephen Page, FCIS, Head EMEA Board Engagement, NASDAQ Governance Solutions, UK. And this presentation is on cognitive diversity and board assessments, driving boardroom excellence. Over to you, Mr. Stephen Page.
Thank you very much. And hopefully I've been joined by my colleague, who is in India, Ravi. Are you there, Ravi?
Yes, sir.
Are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay. Ravi's going to be working the slides for me, so to speak. So a very important individual. So hello, everyone, again. And again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you've been on here a long time as it is, but I want to cover what I think are two critically important yet often overlooked areas when we talk about board performance. I'm talking about cognitive diversity in the boardroom and board evaluations. I have quite a few slides here, but I'm acutely aware of the phrase death by PowerPoint. I definitely don't want to subject you to that. So I've tried to make the slides sort of interesting and stimulating. They will hopefully challenge some of your preconceptions. I certainly hope that will be the case, because I think we could probably all do with a little more constructive challenge. So if I could ask you to put the next slide on, please. One slide. Can you put the slide before that? That's it. Thank you. So the first point I want to make here is about boards answering the right questions, because clearly there are issues if they are not. I actually think this is a very real problem. Many boards simply haven't realized this yet. They are actually, I think, fighting yesterday's battles, not focusing on data that really matters. To me, this speaks very much of the need for more board diversity, the need to ensure that each and every director can bring something different to the boardroom. The second question on the slide is linked to board evaluation. Put simply, how can a board know it's performing effectively if it fails to properly measure its performance? It's often been said that what gets measured improves. I think that's actually, Mr. Peter Hucker. I think actually Peter Hucker has supposedly said that, but I think when I was investigating that, that's not actually the case. But anyway, that certainly applies boards. So board evaluations like board diversity are important drivers, very important drivers when it comes to improving board effectiveness, which is why I want to focus on them here today. If we could have the next slide, please, Ravi. One slide before that, Ravi? I think we're one slide out. One before that? That's the one. So thank you. So this is really the agenda. So I'm looking at cognitive diversity. Studies that showed, and studies show, frankly, that meetings, to be candid, are catastrophically inefficient predictors of outcomes. In other words, meetings are very good at making very bad decisions. That's a fact, I'm afraid. The no reasons for this and bad people dynamics, which is part of board diversity, is a key factor here. There are also some common misconceptions about board diversity, which I will be addressing. Quickly moving on to board evaluations, where I'll be talking about the why, what's the purpose for board evaluations. Deadly serious here, because it's not as obvious as you might think. I will also be looking at what listed companies in the UK are reporting when publishing details of their board evaluations, because it's now a UK Corporate Governance Code requirement. A surprising amount of detail on board evaluations needs to be shown in listed companies' annual accounts. And we'll also be looking what's around the corner, perhaps what's on the horizon. If we could go to the next slide, please. Right, what do you see? A rabbit or a duck? I must admit, I change my mind every time I look at this picture. What this shows is that we all have blind spots, and boards are no different, meaning directors are often not seeing a complete story of the challenges and opportunities that are faced by business. They are not seeing the whole story. There was a wonderful study by two social psychologists, I think about 2001, 2000, something like that. And there were two groups. There was a US group and a Japanese group, and they were both shown video clips of underwater scenes. When they were asked to describe what they had seen, what was striking was that the two groups reported seeing very different things. For example, the US group talked about the different fish they had seen, whilst the Japanese group described the background, not referring to fish at all. The blind spots in this study resulted from cultural differences born of being raised in the US and in Japan. For performance purposes, let's supposing you could combine the US and Japanese groups into one team. If you did that, you would effectively be giving yourself a much better picture of reality, with each company's blind spots or each of the group's blind spots being cancelled out. This brings me to the need for more diversity of thought in the boardroom, which is really my theme today. I think diversity of thought is incredibly powerful and yet underused, criminally underused tool for improving board performance. And I hope to convince you of that in the next few minutes. If we could look at the next slide, please. So there are two types of diversity. We're going to be focusing on cognitive diversity, or diversity of thought, which is perhaps a better way to refer to it as. That's concerned with perspective, say intelligence, experience, different thinking styles, if you will. Then there's identity diversity. A lot of people look at this as being the only form of diversity. They're wrong. We're looking here at gender, as I say, ethnicity, religion, any form of diversity that can be grouped into a demographic. But we're going to focus on cognitive diversity because I think it's diversity of thought that can significantly improve the performance of boards. The next slide, please. Diversity of thought is not frivolous. It's not something that's simply a nice thing to have. I strongly believe that an effective board must have diversity of thought amongst its directors if it's to reduce the problem of those blind spots we talked about a little earlier. Next slide, please. Common sense, right? A lot of people say this to me. There's three common statements here. Diversity, first one. Diversity means a trade-off with the quality of directors. Second one, we need the cleverest, most experienced, the most knowledgeable directors. Yeah, that's all we need. And the last one, we just need to make sure that directors make accurate decisions. Well, if you believed all of that, I'm afraid you would be, next slide. Next slide, please. Timing is everything. You'd be wrong. If we can move on to the very next slide. Right, these are these three questions again, or three statements, which I've set out here, along with my response. So if we look at the first one, diversity inevitably means a trade-off with excellence. I think that's the most common one, criticism, if you will. That would be true if it was just diversity we're interested in, but actually we're also interested in bringing relevant skills to the board as well. It's not, as I say, a box ticking exercise. For example, if you were to appoint me to say an all-female, very young board committee made up of scientists discussing nuclear physics, just bear with me for a moment, I might bring some diversity to that committee, but I'm afraid I would bring zero benefit. because I have nothing relevant to say about nuclear physics. It's often overlooked that when we talk about adding diversity, it also means adding relevant skills. So that's the first point. And the second point, we need the cleverest, most experienced people. Well, as I say here, experts have blind spots. We all have blind spots. Experts are no different. And the final point here, we need to make sure that board make correct decisions. Being correct is not enough. Not that that's the case when boards need to evaluate different options. They need to innovate. For that, you need different insights on the board. You need variety. As I say here at the bottom of the slide, we need to think about boards holistically, not as a collection of individuals. A well-constructed board will outperform individual directors. The next slide, please. Still not convinced? I imagine there's some of you who aren't. So let me move on to the next slide. This is my favorite example. Actually refers to, there was a team headed by a guy called Jack Soll at Duke University in the US some years back. He looked at, or he and his team looked at 28,000 professional economists. And the question they put themselves, is the average prediction of a team better than the prediction of the top performer? Now, in the study, in this slide here, there was a top performer was around 5% more accurate than the average forecaster. So the average forecast, we're talking about here economists, they previously predicted how economies would change over a period of time, and then they were analyzed. So as I say, the top one was 5% more accurate than the average. Well, what if you took the average prediction of the top 6 economists, as I'll say here, perhaps you put them into a virtual team and compare the average result of this team with the top economist. Now, if the top performing economist also happened to be the fastest 400-meter runner, bear with me for a moment, and that team was formed of, and then there was a team formed of the next 400-meter runners, the team will clearly be much slower than the fastest runner, especially if the fastest runner was, if you like, clones. So there were a team of these cloned fastest runners. Maybe you had a team of cloned Usain Bolts. Now, if you averaged the time of the slower, clearly the slower team would naturally be slower than the fastest team. But more to the point, if you added a member of the slowest team into the fastest team, there will be a dilution of that team. There would in fact be a trade-off in the equality and in the quality of that team. But the point is, if we go on to the next slide, and we're going back now to the prediction of economies, when the average score, remember we're talking about economic predictions here, of the top 6 economists was compared with the score of the top economist, the team was more accurate by an incredible 15%. They were so shocked by that result, by the way, they went and looked at all the data again. This is the polar opposite of a dilution. The team was much better at predicting outcomes than the top economist, even though the top economist was clearly the best, and the best by more than 5%. So how can a team made up of individuals whose forecasts are inferior to the top forecaster actually outperform that performer? It doesn't make sense, right? Let's have a look at the next slide. But it does. And it's because by combining the diverse thoughts, as I say here, of the most high-performing economists, you get, which we all want to get to, collective intelligence. When you have collective intelligence, we're talking about different frames of reference brought by each economist, different ways of looking at the problem, different economic models. As I've said here, you get a better picture when you can pool information. That much better than taking the perspective of a single person, even if that person happens to be the top performer, as was the case here. Now, this is counterintuitive to many, but it's a fact. And what if boards, as I say here, harness the power of cognitive diversity when making decisions, which is the most important function of a board? I'm not suggesting you could improve board decisions by 15%, but it does make you think, doesn't it? Next slide, please. So we discussed that one so we can move on. If we go on to the next slide, especially as we're a bit short of time. Meetings, as I said here, appallingly inefficient. Over the last 2 decades, the time spent by managers and employees in meetings has increased, as I say here, by over 50%. There are literally millions of meetings not only board meetings, of course, taking place every single working day. And yet meetings are prone to the same basic failings that have been known for many, many years. The next slide, please. The two most common people problems are what's called dominance dynamics and information cascade. They both are well known and they squeeze out diversity of thought. Dominance dynamics in the boardroom, not surprisingly perhaps, invariably involves the leadership style of the CEO, which often takes the form of a dominance leadership. Now, with dominance leadership, subordinates effectively fall into line, out of status, or perhaps even out of fear, or even both. Prestige leadership is different. That happens when team members command respect because of their prestige, perhaps because of their, shall we say, their expertise. Now, the relevance to boards is that there's now a strong school of thought that CEOs need to flip between these two leadership styles. You need dominance leadership by a CEO when executing strategy, that is, after decisions have been made. Diversity is not a good idea at all when you're looking to actually implement execute strategy, when you need to get the job done. You don't need diversity of thought at that stage. The other form of leadership is prestige leadership. Well, this should be used by CEO when diverse opinions are needed by fellow directors in the boardroom. That's when you need decisions, you need innovation, you need different collective intelligence, different thoughts. So two different leadership styles. Interesting how many of CEOs are actually aware of that and can accommodate that. Looking at an information cascade, which is this other common problem, that happens when information flows to team members, often from the top and invariably from the CEO. What happens is that directors downriver, if you like, down the chain, they mirror, echo, or agree what's been said before because they think the information they hold is already known to the board. They will be embarrassed, perhaps, or feel slightly stupid to come forward with their thoughts. So they say nothing and simply nod their heads in agreement. And that's a real problem. Both dominance dynamics and information cascades present very real performance problems for boards. They result in directors not speaking up, not giving diverse views and thoughts in the boardroom, and those thoughts being squeezed out from the decision-making process, which results in poorer decisions. Unfortunately, there are many studies that show this. We can move on to the next slide. So here, I've got some examples where, as I've said, dynamics are skewed. First one, directors fail to speak up or contribute to meetings. Possible remedy here, almost certainly a remedy, is psychological safety in a boardroom. There were some great studies carried out by Google years ago, and they conclusively proved, if you will, that the number one thing you can do to improve the efficiency of meetings is to ensure that psychological safety exists in that boardroom. Everyone should feel comfortable about speaking up. The second point here about the CEO, the director saying what the CEOs want to hear. Again, psychological safety. And the last point about directors subconsciously withholding information because they think others know. That point of information cascade. I put here to change format of the agenda. I think what they do is, I think it's Google, it might be an Apple. What they do there to try and get around this problem is that when there's a paper that's presented to the board for discussion and decision, the proposer and the CEO speak last. So that gives other directors the opportunity to express their thoughts, hopefully without dominance, dynamic dominance kicking in. Okay, if we can move to the next slide. Thank you. I want to finish by quickly looking at board evaluations. I think you've, are we missing a slide here? Can you go back a slide? Thank you. I think that's where we want to be. So I want to finish by looking at board evaluations very quickly. So what's the purpose of evaluations? Looking at some disclosure and perhaps changes on the horizon. So if we go to the next slide, please, Ravi. Okay, purpose of board evaluations. Few people ask why the board evaluations are performed and who are they performed for. This question was recently considered by the UK government in undertaking a review on the effectiveness of third-party board evaluators. At the request of the UK government, the study was actually undertaken by my institute, the UK Chartered Governance Institute, And they posed these two questions. So I won't read it all out, but the first option, if you will, the first rationale for board evaluation is that to reassure shareholders that the board takes its responsibilities seriously, with the external reviewer, in this case, identifying areas for improvement. The second option is that the board evaluation is undertaken to assure shareholders on future performance. It provides, if you like, a level of assurance. In that case, the external reviewer almost takes the role, as I said here, as a quasi-auditor. Well, perhaps not surprisingly, the majority of people went with option one, that it was about, if board evaluations are about reassuring shareholders that the board wishes to improve. On to the next slide, please. UK Corporate Governance Code is made up of 18 principles and 41 provisions. Principles have to be adopted, have to be applied. You can't, they're not comply and explain. You have to enforce, if you will, embed a principle and explain how you've done so. There are also a number of provisions, well, they're comply and explain, so you can adopt different models if you explain why. And then there's also a very helpful guidance of board effectiveness, about 50 pages long, I think, which helps boards implement these principles and provisions. The reason I mention this is if we move on to the next slide. Yeah, is provision 23. There's a few provisions actually in one principle concerning board evaluations, but I wanted to focus on this particular one. That's a requirement for boards to disclose how the board evaluation was conducted, the actual outcomes of that evaluation, the action the board has taken, and how this will influence board compositions. If you comply with the code, you're required to include this information in your annual report and accounts, which shocks some people. What we did, we carried out a study. We just looked at 10% of the FTSE 350 accounts filed for that year, which showed for the first time these new board evaluation disclosure requirements. And what we focused on was the disclosure on the outcomes of board evaluations and the actions taken by boards as a result. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So this is what we found. These are the top 5 actionable highlights based on our survey. These are in no particular order, by the way. So the first point is that board meeting materials were raised regularly when board evaluations were undertaken. And the concern was often about the size and the compilation, the order, if you will, of board packs. There was also concern about the need for increased stakeholder engagement. I think that's actually probably results from the EU legislation requiring greater consultation with employees. There was also a point about valuation, board composition, particularly about the need to look at the skill sets of individual directors. Then there was a greater oversight of risk. Technology was often cited. Boards need more information on technology risk. Interestingly, unfortunately, in many ways, few of them spoke about risks posed by pandemics. And lastly on here, the more time to be spent at board meetings discussing strategy, less time to be spent on operational administrative matters. I think this talks to some extent about restructuring agendas, which takes us back to the first point. I've written an article about this in far more detail, which is going to be published by NASDAQ in the coming weeks, I'm told. The next slide, please. And the final slide, what's around the corner? Time precludes me from saying too much here. Other than in the UK, it's possible that there will be 2 new voluntary codes concerning board evaluation, along with a guidance note. The new board evaluation codes will apply to all external board evaluators and those listed companies as well in their dealings with third-party board evaluators. There'll be voluntary codes. I'm not aware of any other jurisdictions looking to do this, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised if others followed suit at some stage in the future. And so my very last slide, that's just to thank you very much for listening to me. It's been a long morning for me and a long afternoon for you, but thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stephen Page, for throwing light on the various aspects. We're opening now to some Q&A. If any of you have questions for Mr. Stephen Page, please write in. But before I take your questions, I already have 5 questions, Mr. Stephen, that have come to us from our main partner, NASDAQ, and I would like to take them up very quickly, and I request you to keep the answers brief. The first question is, could you describe the basics of the board decision framework you spoke about?
Right, yeah. I said earlier on that the board need to be mindful of trade-offs. Unfortunately, can't be all things to all people. So there's a particular framework that's been discussed, and it's based on 3 principles. I mentioned very quickly. The first one is principle of multiplication. If you're spending $1, you need to make sure you get $1 in return. Then there's the principle of comparative advantage. So when you're looking to undertake a project, you should only do so if you have a comparative advantage in that area. To some extent, it speaks to your purpose. And the last point is it should be material. You should only be undertaking projects if it benefits your material stakeholders. So that very loosely would be the framework I had in mind.
All right, the question number 2 coming for you is, could you explain a little bit more about what you mean by creating stakeholder value?
Yeah, stakeholder value is the same as social value. Some people, you can use the 2 terms as synonymous. So when I talk about, or when people are talking about stakeholder value, we're talking about profits for investors. That's an easy one. It gets slightly more complicated, though. You can talk about employees. Well, I think we understand what value we give to employees. We give them their livelihoods, if you will. For customers, I think is about added value. For suppliers, I would say funding. For community, vitality. And then we get to the environment. I mean, that's a tough one, environmental degradation. What are we talking about? Pollution? Are we talking about climate control? Are we talking about biodiversity? So when we talk about creating social value for environment, I think we're looking at, I would suggest, renewal. And the last one, it was surprisingly, but some people actually, is the government. But here the social value is in the form of paying tax, it's taxation. So that would, when I talk about sort of social or stakeholder value, that's what I'm talking about.
All right. And could you please give us a bit of the definition? What is the, where do you think it is going ahead now? The situation as we see it. Perhaps a short definition of the corporate purpose, the way you look at it?
Yeah, well, purpose is another term that is used by many people, like stakeholder capitalism, frankly, without their fully understanding what it means. I think the purpose best defined by saying what it should include. I think there are 2 dimensions. Yeah, 2 dimensions that. There's who, what is the company, or who is the company exist for? That's actually who are the material stakeholders. And secondly, the why. When you decide a purpose, why are you doing something? And I think that speaks to the comparative advantage that the company has. So there's 2 dynamics to purpose. Who and the why, and I think companies need to answer those when they're developing their corporate purpose statements.
Right. And can you give us some examples of other changes that stakeholder capitalism would have on the board?
I think when I'm looking at that, I think you'll be thinking of, I think the time horizons is important, because one thing about stakeholder capitalism is that the benefits, from the point of view of the academic research has been undertaken, the benefits only accrue over the long term. So your time horizons need to shift. So when you're looking at after investment decisions, you should be looking to see the benefits, how the share price has been affected, but you should be looking in the long term, not over the next couple of months. That's the point. And I think that's an important point. As I say, it's not short term. You need to look over the long term.
Right. And lastly, Mr. Stephen Page, how might stakeholder capitalism affect the board remuneration?
I think it speaks to the point I just made, actually, about long-term horizons. I'm a great believer in restrictive shares. I think remuneration plans should be made an awful lot simpler. I've met directors, candidly, I wouldn't give you their names, of course, who they say themselves, they don't understand how their remuneration is calculated, which to my mind is crazy. We spend pages and pages and pages describing remuneration of directors, and it got so complicated that directors themselves don't know. We need to simplify that. And I think through stakeholder capitalism and what I've been saying, we can issue restrictive shares, the understanding straightforward shares, but they don't vest until, should we say, 4 to 5 years after the event, given the fact that the benefits of decisions they've taken won't be seen until within that horizon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stephen Page. Thank you for sharing all your deep insights. I'm sure I've covered a lot of these questions that our IoT members must have had in their minds. Thank you again. Thank you to you and to all the other panelists who were part of this global webinar today for helping us learn that resilience is what we have to keep in mind in our strategies going forward in our boardrooms. And before I actually move further and I invite Mr. Ashok Kapoor to deliver a vote of thanks, I would like to request all of you to mark your diaries with our next event, which is going to be on 10th of September, Thursday, at 4 p.m. Now, this is special most insightful webinar on Thursday, September 10 at 4 p.m. jointly with IICA, which will be focusing on building corporate governance competencies in boardroom through digitization and independent directors. You'll be finding the details of it very shortly on our website, and also the information will be shared. Going forward, I would now like to request Mr. Ashok Kapoor, retired IAS Director General, IIT India, please propose a brief vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ritika. On behalf of the Institute of Directors, it's my great pleasure and a privilege to propose a vote of thanks to all our very distinguished speakers and experts, starting with Mr. Stephen Page. I'm glad to inform that more than 400 participants comprising some of the senior-most directors from public and private sector who have joined us. On behalf of those participants also, I'd like to convey my thanks. Mr. Stephen Page, especially, before I thank Mr. Stephen Page, I must say that the President, Lieutenant General J.S. Ahluwalia, who's been unanimously elected the President of the Institute of Directors, set the tone for the deliberations today by outlining the new normals that we expect now, the dynamic instability that we are all faced with, especially in the boards, and how to meet the emerging challenges, that is, especially with cloud technology and working remotely. Though he cautioned that it's not a panacea, but it is a very expedient method. I would also, first I would begin by thanking Mr. Stephen Page. He is a very distinguished expert, and he is the head of board engagement, NASDAQ governance solutions UK for the whole of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So he has a great responsibility. We are really grateful to you for your very comprehensive analysis of the situation. One thing after hearing you is, we can assure you by the time we invite you again for our next webinar or seminar, either in India or in London, where we also have a presence, I'm sure you'll find the Institute of Directors and the boards that we represent, they'll be on the same page with you, because you have raised some very pertinent points about decision making at the top level. And we are grateful that you have outlined the UK governance code of governance and the principles therein, which all of us will find very, very useful and informative. Our special thanks on behalf of the IOD go to Mr. Dhanendra Kumar. Our friends, Mr. Dhanendra Kumar, Ritika has already described his CV. He's one of India's leading experts in boardroom performance, working of the boards, and with his vast experience, not only in India, but also in the World Bank. He brings an international perspective on boardroom functioning. And friends, those of you who may not be knowing, Mr. Dhanendra Kumar was the chairman of the Competition Commission of India before retirement. And we had the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Dhanendra Kumar in one of our earlier global seminars in Dubai, where he spoke so well that our Dubai hosts told us, Mr. Dhanendra Kumar, there's no competition with him regarding the boardroom functioning. Our special thanks to him for moderating a session equally brilliant people. I have Mr. Rahul Sareen. Mr. Rahul Sareen has made some very pertinent points about the topical issues of today and how we can move forward. And he has raised a very pertinent point, friends. You must have noticed that he's quoted Confucius and cautioned us that what we know is as important as we don't know. In fact, from the land of birth of Confucius, I think we can all appreciate his wisdom that we also don't know about the land where Confucius was born, at least in India. We had with us Mr. Saurabh Chandra, who is an equally distinguished former colleague of ours. And Saurabh has been a very distinguished speaker, apart from being a very talented civil servant. And he has a very vast experience, and he's given us some very great insights into how the peer review is done for the evaluation of the board of directors, how the third party valuation is done, and made the very valid point that what are the pitfalls for the boards, that it's not a smooth ride all along. So that is why when he resumed the chairmanship of MCX, people asked, what does X stand for? And I said, we were told that X stands for the excellence of the chairman, that is Mr. Saurabh Chandra. We had with us today Mr. Dr. Aruna Sharma. Dr. Aruna Sharma is the former Steel Secretary to Government of India. And after retirement, I think she's more busy than during the service career. She has been associated with the industry throughout her distinguished career, and she has outlined the problems faced by the boards organization-wise, that whether it's in the service or the manufacturing sector. And I'm sure we in the IOD will be great beneficiary as also of this wisdom, of her wisdom, and of our participants who assembled today. And she has also made the very pertinent point. She's a very distinguished independent director about the policy issues which the independent directors in the future should look after. And the last but not the least, before I thank Mr. Amitabh Kant in absentia, is that Mr. Mr. Ashish Kumar Chauhan. Mr. Ashish Chauhan is, you must have noticed that there is a slight interruption. Actually, friends, it is very symbolic. That was a correction he was making. And as you know, that Ashish, the stock exchange, under his guidance and leadership, has been making corrections which are very beneficial to average retail investors like you and me. And Mr. Chauhan, we had, for those of you who do not know, Mr. Chauhan was with us also similarly in London, where he gave he gave his address, and he spoke to the IOD audience in London for a little while in one of our earlier global seminars, where he outlined the problem of trust, how the board must engender trust, and the black swan events, which he all analyzed brilliantly. So friends, that brings me to Mr. Amitabh Kant, as he had confirmed, but unfortunately he has been summoned uh, at the Sanctum Sanctorum. He's a very key advisor to the top leadership in India, and he had to go. But he has made the very relevant point that the fine but subtle distinction, the line between government and governance has become blurred. So we are, I'm sure you'll thank us for joining me in thanking Mr. Amitabh Kant in absentia, and he's promised that next time he would join us and give the benefit of his great wisdom. And friends, our special thanks go to two people today. One is that the NASDAQ Board Vantage has supported us wholeheartedly. We are really grateful. And the other very brilliant speaker who was also to speak but who has supported us fully is the dynamic chairman of Steel Authority of India Limited, who could not, for a very urgent meeting, could not come, but he sends us his support, and I'm sure we'll get him next time. So friends, that brings us all to the end of this webinar. And as you must have noticed, that more than 400 participants, we are overwhelmed with the public response, and more than 400 of the participants registered themselves. And we hope to meet all of you in our next webinar, which has just been announced by Ritik. Thank you, friends. Thank you, experts, and especially thank you, Mr. Stephen Page.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Ashok Kapoor. It was a delight, it was a pleasure, it was a privilege. So on behalf of the entire panel of speakers and others, may I thank you most sincerely for inviting us. It was a very enjoyable event, and we look forward to being with you sometime later in near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dhanendra Kumar. Thank you so much, Mr. Ashok Kapoor. Thank you all who took time, 400 of you who actually joined us today. And I'm very sure, and it's very clear from the discussions, and we're sure at IOD that all of us are going to emerge through these turbulent times stronger and wiser. We hope to see you soon at our next event, at our next webinar. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.